Welcome to Jack's Corner, where conservative values meet national headlines, and truth and reality have a seat at the table. From Louisville, Kentucky, here's your host, Jack Richardson.
Hey folks, well, welcome back to another edition of Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. And again, just to remind you, I'm not here to give you the news, but to tell you how to process the news that hopefully you have been paying attention to, because there's a lot out there and it does impact you. And the first thing I want to talk about today, though, is the hidden war that conservatives don't know how to fight. Well, you can't win a war if you don't know that you're in one. And you can't defeat an enemy unless you know who he is. And one of the main thrusts of this podcast and my website, Bluegrass Chronicles, is what I have been doing in politics for the last 3 decades. And that is to get people to wake up and recognize the enemies to our freedoms, our life, liberty, and happiness. And if you don't believe that exists, then you're a fool. The plan of the left and the Democrat Party has now become so transparent and treasonous, it's amazing that we don't have an uprising on the right doing more than just benignly and metaphorically throwing tea off ships into the Boston Harbor. As a conservative and having no alternative to being a Republican as well, I guess, it is so frustrating to see how difficult it seems to be for Republican leadership to articulate in a plain and simple language the treasonous plots of the Democrats. Let's just start calling them by simple words and simple names, like the enemies of freedom, the enemies of democracy, the enemies of the people in this country. The enemy must be defined and in clear and bold terms, and this is not a matter of trying to prove anything from weak circumstantial evidence, because the Democrats have basically been telling us what and who they are and what they are going to do. It's just like with the Islamic faith and all the jihadists. They've been warning us for years of their intent to bring death to Israel and death to America. Why wouldn't you believe them? And why wouldn't you act accordingly? The Democrats have been telling us that they have a disdain for our constitutional freedoms. And you either believe like they do or you will be censured and canceled. Many of you have already experienced that. Now, if you own a Tesla, you will be confronted, or you may have your car keyed, or they will burn down a dealership. Friends, the left is inherently violent, and you've been seeing that on TV. I don't know how much more it takes for Republicans and conservatives to get off their lazy butts. We have seen them impeach President Trump twice. They've tried to assassinate him twice. They tried to jail him multiple times. And all too many of us act as if this is just a normal course of events in politics. It's not. And it tells you that they have abandoned their need to appear as traditional freedom-loving Americans. They are not. They are not your equal. They're not your moral equal. Now, we have Democrats calling for violence, burning down institutions they disagree with, and destroying the property of Republicans and conservatives, and they do it by any means. The Democrats censure you, they demean you, they organize boycotts of your businesses and physically confront and intimidate you. You find it no longer peaceful or safe even to be in public spaces anymore. Now you have Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, who has admitted to appointing leftist radical judges to the federal courts for the purposes of stopping Trump. Yeah, 235 is what he appointed, to be exact. Think about that. You have the American people who elected Trump to do the very things that Schumer's federal appointments have collectively gathered together to stop with the nationwide injunctions. Now, that's what I call an insurrection. Judges today are now telling the president and the executive branch how to operate the military and what they can do in foreign affairs and what they can and can't do as far as running the executive branch of government. These people are more than just insurrectionists. They are treasonous. Just look at the D.C. Circuit, where 5 of the federal judges were not born in this country, and they did not have prior judicial experience. That should tell you everything you need to know, that they were appointed as political activists so as to implement their pathological ideology upon the country, not interpret the law that the people's representative passed. Yes, you elect your representatives to enact laws that you want them to enact, but now we've got judges that flaunt that. That's an insurrection as far as I'm concerned. The judges today just flaunt the constitutional constraints upon their powers with impunity and in a revolutionary brazenness. People, how much more is needed to convince you that we are in the midst of a war and that every means at our disposal, every means at your disposal must be used and exercised to purge these un-American and treasonous actors from power? One of the problems we have as a country today is within that group of people who could do something but are too inept or cowardly to do it. And I'm speaking about many in the Republican Party as well. All too often, the Republicans lack the boldness of their convictions like the Democrats have for theirs. Let's take, for instance, this recent dust-up with regard to a journalist being included on a text thread, what they now call the signal scandal. Well, there is no scandal. There was a simple mistake and an oversight that was immediately acknowledged. However, the Republicans overreacted, making this back page story a front page news story. So my counsel to the Republicans, which is not so earth-shaking, is that don't dignify it by answering the questions of the Democrats, who are looking for any opportunity to turn a molehill into a mountain. Don't give them a distraction they need to deflect the public's attention from their crimes. And they are criminals. Just take a look at their voting record. If you were to just go back and take a look at the history of these people in the Democratic Party and the things that they voted for, you would know they were crimes. You would be demanding and screaming that the Department of Justice indict them and jail them. There is no reason why anybody in the Trump White House or the Republican Congress should be taking any questions or advice from those who have without question been attempting to destroy this country for the last 30 years. You can't fight this war on defense. You must go on offense. What is so frustrating is that this should not even have to be said. It should go without saying. There is no scandal regarding a mistaken communication with this so-called signal scandal. The only scandal in America is the Democratic Party and their un-American activities. It has to be crushed and it has to be eliminated. And it must be done boldly and without apology. For every accusation of the left, all you have to do is dig into their history and you will see profound hypocrisy. To repeat what I said recently, Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell, for example, of California, he was sleeping with a Chinese spy, but yet he has the audacity to act as though he is so offended by this so-called mistake with regards to somebody being in on a text thread. And then you have Adam Schiff, who was censored by Congress for lying, and he would be facing criminal charges but for the pardon that he got from Biden. Believe me, there is no Caesar's wife here in the Democratic Party. There is not one clean, virtuous Democrat in the government today. Republicans all too often seem to want to hold their ground when they should be on the attack. Now, with regard to the judiciary and the corruption therein, all one needs to do is to look at our federal district courts in which cases have been brought to stop Trump at what you elected him to do. Think about this. 92% of these judges are Democrat-appointed leftist radical activists. To call them a judge is ridiculous. But the Republicans also have a problem regarding some in our own ranks, in their ranks, of which I have written about before, and that is our majorities could not be any slimmer, yet there are some who supposedly, standing on principle, find it necessary to vote against everything. They are the defectors, and I call them the purists on the right, such as Representative Thomas Massey of the 4th District of Kentucky, who can't seem to find a reason to vote for anything, much less support the party of which he's a member. You would think that he would know who the enemy is and desire to help Trump accomplish his agenda, and if not that, then to honor the will of the constituents within his own district. Unfortunately not. Then we have Republican-appointed judges like Chief Justice Roberts on the Supreme Court, frequently unreliable. They trip over their own self-righteousness. Now, Roberts is exercised over Trump's suggestion that some of the federal court judges that have abused their powers should be impeached. Well, let me remind you, federal judges have been impeached in the past, but the impeachment process is woefully inadequate, and there is a much better cure for the problem of rogue district judges. That cure comes from Congress itself, who sets the jurisdiction of the courts. Yes, you heard that right. The courts get their power from Congress. Early on in our country, Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson confronted the courts. In fact, Congress has the power to eliminate the jurisdiction of district courts or set the jurisdiction for the courts and eliminate courts. And they've done so in the past. Think about this. We have nearly 700 federal judges. Are we really going to start letting judges run our country and run our government? Remember, they are there for life, unelected and unaccountable. Folks, we now have district judges who are telling this country what we can and cannot do legislatively, militarily, and executively, which was never within their power. This is a criminal usurpation of power. It was never granted by the Constitution, and it is such a transparent scheme and plan of the Democratic Party to take control of the government from the people via the judiciary. As we saw in the last weeks and months of Biden's administration, Senator Chuck Schumer pushed through the Senate confirmation of, like I've just said, 235 radical activist judges. He admitted it. In fact, let's get the terminology correct. They're not judges. They are black-robed tyrants. The facts and the evidence is on my side. You can't argue with the facts and the evidence. Given the hundreds of cases that have been lodged against the Trump administration by solidly radical leftist courts, is there anything left of the executive branch of government that a president is allowed to do anymore? Our forefathers never intended that the president had to ask the courts for permission to exercise his powers as president. We are in the midst of a civil war in this country, and communism has found America's open back door, and it's called the judiciary. It's time to do something about it. As I have encouraged in all my articles and podcasts, do something. Don't just sit there. And you say, what? Well, how about picking up the phone and calling your congressman's offices and raising 10 kinds of hell? Let them know your displeasure. Start educating yourselves and start contributing to conservative causes and start educating your friends and your family and your neighbors. Many people like to default to the lazy notion that there's nothing they can do as an excuse to do nothing and to not even try. When you take a look at the left, they have never had any problem with coming up with an idea, bad ideas, and everything they do propose is a failure. Just look at what they have done and look what they did in the last 4 years with Biden. It was an absolute disaster, but they never needed encouragement to act. So if the corrupt left can have the power that they have with so little to offer the American people, then how much more can you do with the common sense that you have and the right solutions for the ills that plague our country? So often the reason people think that they cannot do anything is because they don't think about it and would rather not. It's like the saying reportedly of Thomas Edison once said that 5% of the people think, 10% of the people think they think, and 85% of the people would rather die than think. That is what is killing the good and killing America. It's not that the left is so smart. They are simply dedicated and driven by their evil passions. And on the other hand, are good at manufacturing excuses for doing nothing. With Trump in office, we cannot afford to miss this opportunity to restore our country. So, folks, let's just get to work. Now, I want to talk about another subject that's also near and dear to my heart in a way because I am a conservative and I am a Republican, but I don't know that it's so much that I have a choice. It's if I desire life, liberty, and happiness, that's exactly what I'm going to be. But I was thinking about it the other day, and I was thinking about why do I hate so many conservatives and Republicans? Well, within the last week, the Democrats narrowly won a special election for a Pennsylvania state Senate seat in a Republican area where Trump won by a substantial margin. Think about that. Republicans have held this seat in Pennsylvania for nearly a century, and the Democrats won by several hundred votes, narrowly defeating the Republican. How could this happen? It's simple. Republican voters do what they do so well. They sit on their butts and they didn't vote. How outrageous is that? Folks, life has obligations whether you want them or not, and voting is not optional. By virtue of living, we have obligations to one another. Your omissions to do what a responsible citizen should do is inexcusable, but preach that to Republican voters who seem to have a monopoly on manufacturing excuses. I don't care if the vote involves a dog catcher or president. It's all important. In these special state elections, it can make the difference when it comes to redistricting and maintaining a majority in Congress. There is no such thing as something too small. As the famous old saying goes, for the want of a nail, a shoe is lost, and for the want of a shoe, a horse is lost, and for the want of a horse, a soldier is lost, and for the want of a soldier, a battle is lost, and for the want of a battle, a war is lost. And Republicans have been losing wars for the want of lazy, good-for-nothing conservatives and Republicans who live in denial that anything bad can come of their indolence. Republicans act as if there's no consequence to their voting. Even when, if they lose the election and it goes to the other side, the loss of that election may increase their taxes, or that criminal migrants will be infesting your peaceful town or placing your family at risk. Republicans and conservatives seem so indifferent at times, recklessly indifferent. The priorities of so many are so screwed up. I'd be okay with them being as irresponsible as they want as long as the consequences didn't affect me and others, but it does. Folks, if you do nothing else in your civic involvement, then at least get on your family, friends, and neighbors to get off their well-fed butts and go vote. It really isn't asking too much. In Kentucky, a red state with supermajorities in the House and the Senate, we have a Nancy Pelosi leftist as governor who has visions of grandeur to be president of the United States. I have cataloged all of his lies, and they would fill a book. He is a wretched, evil man behind the cameras and a deceiving pretty boy when the cameras are rolling. I will soon be publishing an article of his deceitful and reprobate ways, but the big question for Kentucky is, how in the hell can you be so cognitively dissident to vote for a guy like that? Well, in simplistic terms, too many voters are simpletons and just sheer stupid. But then in the race that placed Andy Beshear in the Kentucky governor's mansion was lost by only 5,500 votes, where Republicans and conservatives just didn't do anything and they didn't show up to vote. The bottom line here is Republicans and conservatives must start exercising more discipline over their lives, their schedules, and their civic responsibilities. Far too much responsibility falls on the shoulders of so few. And so shame on those who sit by and manufacture excuses why they can't get to the polls to vote. Make your cause to hold others around you to be responsible. Hold them to account. Just like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, well, you can be that squeaky wheel to the point where you get others to do what they should do on their own, even if it's just to shut you up. Basically and practically, the skill of confrontation is what you need to develop. After all, it is ultimately to your benefit. Now, I want to transition to another topic that is really important, and it can be depressing, but it's also for many very reassuring because people have it wrong as to what it takes to really change things. And I call it the 3% rule. Now, I'm not here necessarily to give you the news, but rather to tell you how to process the news and what you can do about it. You've heard about all of the rogue leftist radical judges, which I recently discussed in an article entitled The Black Robe Insurrection. And I warned everybody that simply because they don a black robe doesn't mean they know anything. In fact, I would like a new regulation to be passed barring the black robe as something that you wear, just like the hijabs are banned in certain countries, because it tends to hide who you really are. Now, to be fair, yes, there are some good judges out there, but the 235 that were pushed through and appointed as federal judges by Schumer and Biden and under Obama, they were picked strictly and on the basis of their pathological ideology. Someone who operates strictly on ideology has no good answers, only disasters, and they never rule well because everything they do is based upon a theory and a utopian idea that they have. Moreover, if things go wrong, the last one to have to pay the price is them. So by now, we have seen the destruction that the Biden administration brought to this country and all of the misery it caused. What's more troubling is the fact that we now know that he was not in charge, but these leftist Marxist ideologues who were determined to turn America into an authoritarian state where everything was ruled by the deep state and the bureaucracy. And that would be the people who are unelected and unaccountable. This is just like the judges we have today. They are not elected. They serve for life and they are unaccountable. And while some might say, well, they can be impeached, I say no, they cannot, because it takes 2/3 majority in the Senate to remove them. That's no accountability, folks. So now that I have pointed out the problems and the dangers that we have and who the bad actors are, I'm not here just to give you the bad news, but to give you the good news. The good news is just how much you can do about what's going on today. So many people feel helpless as they think that they have to muster up a 51% majority to be able to do anything. Folks, history proves that we're to be wrong. I've talked about this before, and books have been written about this, but there is what has been described in the past as the 3% rule. Now, give or take a few tens of a percent of points here or there, and just rounding it out to 3%, the principle is generally the same. And that is, it only takes 3% of a nation's population who is dedicated and persistent in a particular cause to sway the culture. It only took that small percentage for German people in Germany to elect and to become governed by Nazis who ruled with an iron fist. So the people voted in their oppressors, but they did so because of that small group of dedicated revolutionaries that switched the culture. We see that again in Russia, where the same small percentage were communists. Likewise, Russia became a communist state, and the consequences were disastrous, not only for Russia, but for the whole world. The communist dictators in both Russia and China collectively are responsible for the murder of approximately 120 million people in the last 100 years. But we find ourselves having to debate over the evils of communism. Can you imagine that? With a history like that, and we still have to debate that? Why should we even allow those types of people in our schools to indoctrinate our children? And why is the discussion even given a seat at the table? The proof is in and the evidence is conclusive. So why do we even treat them as moral equivalents? We shouldn't. Then in America, patriots were fighting for our independence, and likewise, it only took a slightly larger percentage, I'd say in the 4% range, who wanted independence, but the majority wanted to remain under the rule of the English crown. Nevertheless, these dedicated and devoted 3%ers, who I'm very grateful for, were the ones that gave us the wonderful country we have. We became the beneficiaries of what that 3 or 4% did. So why am I telling you all this? Well, I'm telling you all this from the standpoint that there is much more that you can do. As small as you might think that it might be, it doesn't take many of you who persist at your task to change things for the better or to change things for the good. Think about this. If the bad guys can do it with just 3%, the same goes for the good guys. It's just the problem with the good guys is getting them to act. So again, I can't emphasize enough that from the simplest things of just donating $5 a month to a conservative or Republican cause can make a huge difference. Simply calling up your state senator or representative has a huge impact because they do take note as to public opinion. But as I know too well, from so many of my friends in the Kentucky state legislature, they get frustrated because when a piece of legislation comes up, the only ones that show up in regards to that legislation are those who are opposed to it. And I can tell you with the pictures that I've seen and the people that show up, these are screaming, wild-eyed, blue-haired leftist radicals and teachers intimidating and physically threatening legislators. And it's unbelievable. But they don't have anybody to back them up. It's like you vote for them, you throw the keys to them and say, good luck. Well, that doesn't cut it. And you would never allow your children anywhere near some of these people that show up to protest, these teachers that show up to protest, yelling and screaming and intimidating, and they really are violent in their nature. But yet you do so very little to help the people that you elect to pass the laws that you elected them to pass. They just don't seem to get any Republican support to show up basically and to counter protest or to support the good legislation that they've been elected to pass. So as I said in my book, America's Systemic Psychosis, at the last chapter, I give 10 ways and 10 points on how to take your country back. And one of them is getting involved in calling or writing your legislators and doing it not just once, but making it a part of your routine. Also, get involved in the local party or a local conservative organization. These are things that don't take much time or cost that much money. And after all, you do have a civic responsibility. So many think that their one little phone call or letter or contribution doesn't make that much of a difference. But I've been there at the other end, and I can tell you that it does. And when you multiply that out over millions and you have that dedicated of a group of the 3%, then you can flip things around. You can flip things for the good. I have seen it, and I've seen it done. So if I can leave you with anything, it's let me disabuse you of the thought or the notion that it takes 51% to rule. It doesn't, and the history proves that. So take courage and do your small part. No one is asking you to get out there and contribute tens of thousands of dollars, and no one is asking you to spend hours on the phone calling every legislator in your state or your state senator, and no one is calling upon you to do the same things like I do with this podcast or my website, and nobody's asking you to publish books or write articles. The only reason I do this is to encourage you to just do your very small part, and if others will do just the same, we will be in a very good shape, folks. So let me close with reminding you of the 3% rule and encouraging you to get involved and to do your small part, because it makes a big difference, and it does work, and the best part of it is that you will be the beneficiary of that small effort. Okay, so to close this particular segment out, let me remind you that the 3% rule is very doable, and I want you to encourage you with that 3% rule because it doesn't take that much from you. It's just the small part that you can do that makes a big difference, and it does work. I've been there. I know that it works. And with that said, let's all get together and work on your calendar. Let's mark your calendar. Let's work on your budget. That small $5 a month. Let's make a call to your local Republican Party and conservative groups. And even if you don't attend the meetings, sign up and get their newsletters. So let's start making it a habit and part of our daily schedule or weekly schedule to be a part of the change that we need in this country. So there you have it. Now you know the problems we face, but you also know the ways in which you can help fix things. And it's not that difficult. Just start doing something. Now, I just want to talk about one more thing very quickly here. What do you have in common with those who support sex slave trades? What do you have in common with those who support the drug trade and the cartels? What do you have in common with those who support flooding the country with criminal aliens from other countries? What do you have in common with those who support surgically changing children's sex? What do you have in common with those who support aborting babies up to the point of birth? Well, if you vote Democrat, that is exactly what you are doing, and that's who you are supporting. Are you yoked with those who do that kind of thing? Why would you have anything in common with those who practice such evil? You cannot support evil and not be evil. So choose today what you are going to be and who you're going to follow. It's either righteousness or evil. Depart from those who practice evil or prepare yourself for their same fate. You can't have it both ways, folks. Choose. Make a choice. And with that, folks, thank you for joining us today. As that it concludes this podcast, and I will see you next time. This is Jack's Corner, and I'm Jack Richardson.